That should work. Okay, so if you take a look, I kind of started to pull this apart to go, all right, like what are we looking at here? Let's focus. Yeah, it can zoom. So if we look at the rhetorical situation of what we have here in chapter 8, ultimately the question on the table that is driving this is, should Hester still have guardianship of Pearl? When we think about the audience, we have to consider that really the audience for this speech are the officials in the room. And because they are both religious and governmental figures, we have to merge those two ideas. You also notice how that helps to give us a sense of the power structure in the room. They were having this conversation before they saw that Hester and Pearl were even in the building. So were they a consideration of needing to be present? No, they were willing to make a decision about this woman and her child without her there. That tells you a lot about where the power lies and where it doesn't. And that has a lot to do with gender as much as it does her supposed sin. When we think of the purpose here, the purpose is simple. They're looking to make a decision. But when we think of exigence, that's a little bit more questionable here, because you're going, why now? If Pearl's 3, why are you now asking this question? Like, that's a little odd. I think if we're going to put a pin to it, consider that Pearl can now speak and think. And so if they wanted to kind of see how this is going, this is a perfect time to put the dipstick in to see, hey, is Hester actually raising her right? We have evidence of that as we look. So as we move into like, okay, how can we engage the framework? We can talk about the appeals that are present because you likely marked sections of the text to notice, hey, this is definitely more logical. This is definitely more of an ethos thing because they're standing on authority or on some kind of supposed thing. This has more of an emotional side to it. Hey, what do we see primarily happening? We don't need to dig down to go, hey, can we point out every single instance of that? But how are we engaging this idea of rhetoric within the text, not just plot? And then we can also look at, okay, what are the big ideas that we have present here that are being engaged? Where would you like to start? With the big ideas or by the pieceworks to get there? It really depends on how your brains work. If you like to kind of put the pieces together before you get to the bigger meaning, some people like to start with the bigger meaning and then deconstruct. I just see heads nodding, but that doesn't really. Go ahead, Peyton.
Pieces.
The what?
The pieces.
Pieces. Okay. What are some of the things you notice happening within this 7 or 8 pages? Start us off. Okay, near the end. Do you see this as an appeal or a strategy? Are they using their mentions of God towards like logically supporting their argument or using him as the credible source? Or do you instead see it as like, well, it's just simply a rhetorical strategy that's there? It might be a choice of, I don't want to call it a metaphor because that's going to be trouble, but something more like that. What do you see it as? Okay, so we can put it here with like logical reasoning. I would agree. For sure, if we understand that religion is tied into this decision-making process, then yeah, that's going to be sort of their bit of logic, their ultimate authority here, for sure. What else did you notice through the thing? I mean, for me on the first page, you can't get past the recognition of Hester at the bottom of the page and the fact that there's a really clear biblical allusion they want to bring up. Did anybody recognize it? The governor brings it up, bottom of the page. He says, "Nay, we might have judged that such a child's mother must needs to be a scarlet woman, and a worthy type of her of Babylon." Here he's referencing a biblical story from the Old Testament about the whore of Babylon. Now, does he say the word whore? Notice I got really loud when I said it. I'm not trying to emphasize it, just making sure. He doesn't have to say it because his audience understands the allusion when he says woman, when he evokes scarlet, which brings in her sin of adultery, and then says Babylon. His audience is going to put the pieces together and be like, that's a good one, sir. But dang, that's the first thing they have to say to her. Not, "Oh, hi, it's good to see you." And just like, "Hey, there's that whore." Ugh. Does this set a tone for the conversation to come? Does this help us to better understand our rhetorical situation? Yeah, look at how this one allusion really helps to present the argument from the perspective of those that are the decision makers. What else did you notice? This could be a tone. This could be a use of a strategy. This could be just a impression that you get on a certain part here where you're like, "Oh, they get really blah here." Remember, we have a big section that we're dealing with, so it might not be that you have as much of like specific lines. Yeah.
At the beginning, I hope it's more Hester and hope it's more Pearl.
Yes. Why do you think they do that?
I don't like how Hester isn't really there. It's just a Scarlet Letter identifying.
Okay. Why are they focusing on Pearl, though? What are they doing in their focus? Okay, so you're talking about on just the first page. Like, remember, Hester's kind of hidden behind the curtain a little bit here, so they can't see her until she steps forward. But yeah, I think if you look in that instance, at the very start, you definitely see this idea of like a swap. She's dressed her like the Scarlet Letter. So it's almost like Hester doesn't need to be there. It's like the letter itself is embodied here. Go a little further though. Once they actually talk to her, and we get to like page 2, page 3 in our cut here, ultimately, why do they want to speak to her? And specifically the governor, the minister that actually speaks forward and tries to like address her. Yeah, they ask her about who made thee. They evoke an idea of the catechism. Did you recognize that word? You might not have ever heard it said. They keep talking, and this would be on like page, I think it's 2. Where they keep talking about, they'll talk about like learning her catechism and having this or that. Nope. First page. Right at the beginning, Mr. Wilson. "Art thou a Christian child, huh? Dost know thy catechism? Or art thou one of those nasty elves or fairies?" So the catechism, catechism, is a mostly Christian concept. It's a book that kind of lays out not just what the religion believes and thinks, but justifies those things with actual scripture. So if you're Catholic, for example, Catholics have this big giant catechism that they rely on, but it justifies, here's what we believe, here is why we believe it, here's the evidence out of our holy book that actually like states it. You're given the look. Are you Catholic? Yeah, ask your parents. They'll probably be able to be like, yeah, nobody reads it. But what they like to do is usually religious people will use the catechism as a beating stick out of those that are followers to be like, do you know it? Can you actually justify it? And here they use it that way. He asked her a simple question. By 3, we said, this is the age that Pearl can now talk and think and reason. And so this little interview is a way to prove like, hey, are you a fit mother? Have you been raising your child the way that we expect you to as a Christian community? So simple question, who made thee? Now, any kid that is raised in a Christian thing should be able to be like, God, Jesus. Those basic bits if you're teaching your kid right. Yet what does Pearl say?
She was picked from a rose.
I was picked from a rose bush like the one outside the prison door. Does she know the right answer, though? You look at how this paragraph is framed. You notice that it's the narrator that has to put this together. Why? Because he is the impartial witness. They don't want to ask Hester the question because Hester knows the answer. They want to ask Pearl, do you know it? Kind of like in class, when a teacher looks at you and asks a question and you try to look at your friends like, somebody help me, and that teacher's like, no, you tell me. I want to know if you know it, not if your friends know it. It's that matter of, can you do it? The impartial narrator has to be the one to step forward and be like, she can. Because if Hester does, hey, guess what? This whole interview gets blown up. Now all of a sudden she's covering. So he has to bring in that little bit to make sure the reader understands here. We can emphasize Pearl's characterization as being troublesome, a little trickster. Kids do this. You ask them a question, they know the right answer. I watch my daughter do it all the time. I'll ask her a question, she knows the answer, and she'll like look at me a little slyly and answer wrong because she thinks she's being funny. It's like, I know you know that I know the answer. I'm gonna give you the wrong one though. Kids do it. They want to see what kind of reaction you get. And so here, blows up, goes all wrong. But notice the choice of the rose bush. Okay, so we have color imagery that's coming through. Scarlet letter, scarlet dress, rose bush. Boom. We have a rose bush that's immediately right there near her. We know there's one in the governor's garden that's right outside of this room. So yeah, there's a logic to this. She would remember it. We also have this thing about nature. Now, this is a really kind of existential heavy question. Go with me. Is religion natural? That's really hard. Now, we're not going to argue that religion is not legitimate. That's not our purpose. If you take away values and beliefs and all that, is religion a natural thing? Or is it based more on belief? Do we have tangible, legitimate proof in the natural world for religion? Now, I'm not arguing yes and I'm not arguing no. This is not the moment that some of you are like, oh my God, my whole life is a lie. No. Don't go there. But think, by presenting both sides and kind of engaging this idea, we can look at how he's making an argument in some ways. She wants to go back to this natural imagery. And in the book, we notice it's going to go back to this natural imagery, especially if you have started reading for next week. Oh my God, he's just hammering you over the head with natural imagery as he sets different scenes in very specific places and uses different ideals in nature to help to emphasize what's going on in scenes. Here, with this, she wants to go to something that is natural, as though she's a natural being, because she is a product of sin. Religion says she doesn't, you're bad. And so notice every time she wants to go back to, I'm a natural being. I don't have a heavenly Father. This concept of like, fine, if you don't think I fit in it, I'm not going to acknowledge that I'm a part of it. It's her playful little game, and it's his way of treading this line, of showing the difference between this strict ideal of a religious community and how they judge versus here's this little girl. Everybody following me? I know that was really heavy to be, 9 o'clock in the morning. Is religion a natural construct? And you're just like, do you see how it can support an argument he's making? Society is not natural. We should understand that. Human nature is to group together, 100%. But the way that we structure a society, a president is not natural, right? A Congress is not natural. We create these strictures of society, how we organize, how we live, how we interact with each other. And in some degree, it goes against the natural order. We need to recognize some of these things. Now, quick hits, because we're running low on time. Some things you should have noticed. One, the idea of judgment that's throughout this passage. They are judging constantly. And ultimately, that judgment is problematic. We see that Hester is able to defend herself very well for why she should keep her daughter, and yet they're hesitant to believe her until it is a figure of authority that steps forth to defend her. When Dimmesdale steps forth, and notice, he does it really with two things. One, a lot of logos. And that logos is put forward through rhetorical questions and exclamations. It is his passion and his knowledge and his understanding that allows him to be the figure of authority here that ultimately sways them to say, okay, sure, keep the kid, but you better not screw up. We've got that present there. We've got definite messages about sin, society. Those are only going to be furthered as we move through the text. Hey, did anybody notice anything rereading this? Did you notice anything weird about Dimmesdale? Hey, how does the whole thing end with Dimmesdale? What? I mean, you should be halfway through the reading section, so if you're halfway through, you should know it already. Tell him.
He's hot,
Uh-huh.
and that's why her was kind of comfortable with,
Mm-hmm.
and how chilling for it turned out that he was kind of sympathetic.
Uh-huh. Notice Hester turns to him. Hey, save me. Step forward here. Help me out, dude. You notice that at the end, he takes her place behind the curtain. They've switched roles by the end of the chapter. Now he's the one who feels like he stepped too far out and now has that sense of shame that he needs to hide. You notice that Pearl goes up and kisses his hand and he acknowledges her physically. And that's something that neither of them do very often at all with anybody. And you're going, what? Oh, don't worry. We'll talk more about it next week because you missed a lot of other clues. If you're just now thinking, oh, is that where they tell you? They told you back in like chapter 2 or 3 that he was the father. You just totally breezed it over. So as you get going, make sure to get your reading set. Really, do not try to wait on this one and